Well, good morning, Wheatley Baptist Church. It's Pastor Dave here with a midweek update. Midweek of the week after Easter. We've gone through our Easter celebration, and in many ways that kind of feels like it's over. I spent some time already this week kind of cleaning up the sanctuary and dealing with a lot of the video and trimming, of all those things that we had to do to kind of put Easter away in a fashion. That's really what I want to talk with you about for the next few minutes before I bring you some announcements. I wonder what life looks like for you this week and the succeeding weeks after Easter. I think for us, there's always this great temptation to stay or to go back into our old life or kind of return to what we know is familiar. And, I think, in fact, I've thought a lot about this in the past few weeks. Even the disciples experienced a setback like that, They remember when they first were called by Jesus, they were out on the sea. I'm talking about Peter, James, and John especially, and they were out in the Sea of Galilee fishing from a boat, and frankly, they weren't doing very well at that. And remember, Jesus kind of challenged them, go out into deeper water, put your nets on the other side. And do you remember it was Peter that was just exasperated and said, "Master, we have worked all night long here. We've not caught a thing, and you want us to let our nets down again. Well, if you say so, we'll let down the nets." And so they did, and you remember the rest of the story. They had this miraculous catch of fish. But if you fast forward 3 years from now, you've got these same fellows, Peter, James, and John, and the rest of the disciples too, are experiencing these amazing things being around Jesus. They've watched him, really complete these mighty acts of healing. They've watched him teach like nobody had taught before. They were even participating in some of the miracles, yet, even they returned to their old ways of fishing. That's what their trade was. They were fishermen. Instead of fishing for men, as Jesus had taught them to do, they just went back to dropping their nets in the water. And, it's interesting to me that after, they must have been worn out and tired, I think, too, after the dramatic events of his death and the resurrection. Remember, though, that he appears to them again. And when he appears to them again, he says, "Look, cast your nets out onto the other side of the boat," and they get this other miraculous catch. And certainly it is Peter, right, that in true Peter fashion blurts out, "It's the Lord." But it begs me to ask the question, and maybe ask you to consider this same thing this week. Why did Peter and the disciples go back to their regular jobs of fishing again? Jesus had called them to so much greater, yet they just went back to fishing. And I think the reason is somewhat clear. If you go back into some of the earlier chapters of John's Gospel, remember that before the crucifixion, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, right? And if that wasn't bad enough, his denials were kind of in spite of this very personal vow that he would go to death with Jesus. Do you remember this? This is John chapter 13, verses 37 and 38. I'll throw it up on the screen here. It says, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I tell you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. And we all know, I think, that after these denials, Peter was just acutely aware of his own inadequacies and his failings and his weaknesses. And I think rather than stepping into, the resurrected life, if you will, and moving forward with Jesus' call in his life to be the rock, to be an apostle, Peter just kind of reverted back to being a fisherman. And I think he that line of thinking allowed him to bring some others with him too. He was discouraged and he was disillusioned. And, I know those words, discouraged and disillusioned, really describe how a lot of us are feeling as we find ourselves in yet another lockdown. But I want you to think differently, folks. You know, in our walks with the Lord, it's true, we very often suffer some major disappointments or even failings of our own doing. You know, is there any disappointment greater maybe than what some of us are feeling right now with the pandemic? But I also want to remind you how Jesus was able to restore Peter. Do you remember this? He said to Peter when they met on the beach there, "Do you love me?" In fact, he asked him this 3 times. And you know, Peter, who once says, "I don't know this man." Right now he says to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said that 3 times. And you know, in that way, he was reversing his denials, and those affirmations became kind of the reaffirmation of Peter's calling to be the rock, to be the great shepherd of the flock that Jesus had called him to be. Remember what Jesus said to Peter. He really kind of sealed this affirmation of Peter. He said, "Feed my sheep." What he was doing was taking Peter back to the beginning, to the very moment of his calling. And Jesus gave Peter this new start and this new challenge. Peter would indeed be fishing again for people, not lowering his nets over the side of a boat. Well, I want you to know the Lord does the same thing for us. And so my prayer for you, and I have been praying earnestly about this, is that the Lord has a special call in each of your lives, and my life too. I want you to really understand that, but I also want you to know that call, the joy that we've felt during Easter time, and frankly, the call that is going to require us to kind of step into a new reality, to step into maybe even a new sense of life, in that we don't know where all of this is going with the pandemic and vaccines and all that kind of stuff. The temptation to return to your old ways, those are very real for all of us. Yet Jesus, the risen Jesus, he meets us in our failings, he meets us in our challenges, and he's the one that kind of brings us back to what our calling is. To live for him, to live for more of his kingdom, not to revert back into our old ways. And so you know, I just encourage you to think a little bit about that this week. Easter's not over, right? The resurrection is not something we just put away and wait till next year. It's the reason that we're Jesus followers. Friends, that brings me to a few announcements I think that maybe fit in a little bit with what I've just shared with you here. First and foremost, you would know that we've completed the work of redeveloping our constitution and the governance and kind of committee structure of our church. And so I know a number of you who weren't able to vote on that are looking for that information. So I want you to know, and maybe you figured this out already, on the email that I sent you that had the link to this very video, there was another link on there that takes you to our website. And there's a page in our website called Who We Are. And down at the bottom of that, there's some links that you can click. And one of the links would take you to our new Constitution. And so I know a lot of you have been interested in where can I get a copy of that. So there's a place you can go right away. But if you want a hard copy, just let us know and we'll get you a hard copy as soon as practical. So no problems with that. And thank you for those of you that worked so hard on that document. But you know, now that we have that in place, the work really just begins. And I also want you to know that the next steps here for us involve council appointing a nominating committee. And so we're just working on the process of that. We just had a meeting this past Monday night where we laid a bunch of this out. And so over the next several weeks, you're going to see by videos like this, some emails, and hopefully we'll actually get to have some of these discussions in person. But you're going to see some information come to you about areas where we're going to need some people to serve. And so I would just ask you to begin praying and begin thinking about some of the giftings, some of the calling that maybe you feel, and how you might be able to plug in with us here once the doors really open up again and we can kind of get back out into our community in an even greater fashion. And the other thing I wanted to ask you to consider, some of you anyways, is an immediate need that we have or for some delegates to attend our CBOQ family assembly. So we have a general annual meeting just like we had for our church. Well, our denomination, the Canadian Baptists of Ontario, Quebec, have that same annual meeting process. And the last link you'll see on this email that I sent you is actually a link over to the CBOQ website where you can see the information about our assembly. So that takes place over a weekend, but because of the pandemic and COVID, that this year, as it did last year, is going to take place on Zoom. So you actually don't even have to leave home this year to be a delegate. We need 2 people to represent our congregation to be able to vote, and I can speak with you about that if you're interested in being one of those people. So we need to kind of choose who those people are in fairly short order, though. So we'd like for you to give that some consideration, some prayerful consideration, and get back to us if you would in 14 days. So today's the April the 6th, so that would be till April the 20th. And if you're able or considering doing that, then we'd like to hear from you inside of that timeline. The other thing I would say, though, is if you're not feeling like you want to be a delegate, we know there's some wonderful opportunities where they present different learning sessions about all kinds of different topics. So again, if you go and click on that link, you'll see the topics that are there. And if any of those are of interest to you, we would encourage you to put your hand up and we would get you registered to attend some of those sessions. So they're not necessarily that you have to be a delegate, but you can just go and maybe that provides you a little bit more information that you'd like to have on a topic. Maybe it provides you with some equipping, so you may feel called to fill in some of the holes that we'd like to fill in our various church committees. In teams, however that might work for you, we just want you to know that's an opportunity that's available to you, and we'd sort of like to facilitate that. Friends, as you can tell, yep, we're in a 4-week lockdown, but I'll tell you the business of the church is not locked down. In fact, we're trying very hard to use this time not as downtime, but as preparation time, as equipping time. And so my last request of each of you is just that you hold these opportunities and these next steps that we're taking in great prayerful discussion with God. Specifically to ask him to continue to help guide us where needed, to give us wisdom and strength and encouragement, and frankly, ask him to speak to you about what you may feel as your calling. Engaging in things that give us great purpose. You're going to hear me talk a lot about that in the next few weeks. We're going to start a new sermon series around this. It's how we deal sometimes with disappointments and failings. Look what happened with Peter. Right? The Lord said, I prepared you, feed my sheep. And so Peter took that to heart, and he certainly went in to become the rock that Jesus had called him to be. I'll leave those things with your prayerful consideration again. My prayer as well is that you have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope you're enjoying the weather. It feels, today like summertime. I can't believe that. So I hope you get out and enjoy a little bit of sunshine and fresh air. Blessings. Can't wait to see you soon.